Well, first of all, it's peaceful. And it really represents the treaty relationship and the relationship that Indigenous peoples have always wanted to have with the settlers, one of peaceful exchange of culture and ideas and living and working together. And so erecting a teepee is saying, if you're going to say no relationship is more important than the one with Indigenous peoples, and that we have to refocus on the nation-to-nation relationship, then if you're going to have any kind of celebration of Canada, of course there has to be important ceremonial and symbolic representation of Indigenous culture there. And the fact that instead of that being welcomed, they sent in the RCMP and made arrests and set the teepee outside of the barricades really goes to show that we are nowhere near the reconciliation process that Trudeau speaks about.
Meanwhile, the Idle No More movement is also calling for a national day of action in support of Indigenous self-determination over land, territories, and resources on July 1st. You're quite involved in the movement. How prevalent is that sentiment among the Indigenous community?
I think it's very prevalent. There's a real growing sense that all of the superficial words and gestures are really overshadowing the crisis that we have in this country. You know, in addition to the fact that our lands and resources haven't been returned, or the fact that our laws and jurisdictions aren't being respected, we also have the ongoing crisis of murdered and missing Indigenous women, kids in foster care, people overrepresented in prison, high rates of poverty. It's never ending. And what Indigenous people are saying is that before you start celebrating, we really need to acknowledge and address these crisis issues. And I think Idle No More and many others are setting up lots of on-the-ground resistance activities for July 1st.
Yeah. Do you think, though, we're talking about a community with very diverse viewpoints, you know? How would you describe the spectrum of sentiments from the Indigenous community?
Well, that's a really good question, because there are Indigenous groups that are going to be engaging in different celebrations on Canada Day, but many of them have said and very clarified that their celebrations are about the fact that we are still here. We have survived scalping laws, smallpox blankets, murders in residential schools, and forced sterilizations, and that we're still here, we still have our identity, and that in and of itself is something to celebrate in opposition to Canada's celebrations. And then, of course, there are others who are working hand in hand with Canadian officials to engage in regular Canada Day celebrations. So while there is a spectrum of diverse views, I think you would find that the vast majority tend to be in the group that are either celebrating their survival or resisting Canada Day in general.
So in a statement the Prime Minister issued on this year's National Aboriginal Day, he says, and I quote, and you referenced it because we've heard him say these kinds of things before. No relationship is more important to Canada than the relationship with Indigenous peoples. Our government is working together with Indigenous peoples to build a nation-to-nation, Inuit Crown, government-to-government relationship, one based on respect, partnership, and recognition of rights. So tell me, are you saying that, I don't want to put words in your mouth, are you sick and tired of hearing these kind of words?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I mean, the short answer to that is yes. So far, all we've heard is, we're improving the relationship, we're building trust, we have important first steps, and we have been stuck in that mode for literally decades. And in fact, every single promise that Prime Minister Trudeau has made on the Indigenous front has been broken, and including the nation-to-nation relationship. So far, he's only talking to a handful of national Aboriginal organizations. He hasn't even started to talk to the actual nations, which are the Mi'kmaq Nation, the Cree Nation, the Haudenosaunee, and many of the others, the actual rights holders themselves. And until that dynamic changes, we're never going to move forward. And that's why there's so many people trying to change this conversation to say, at least live up to your words and stop with the superficial gestures. We're really sick of land acknowledgements. What you should be doing is actually transferring the land back to us. And these are concrete examples of what's not working.